Hello and welcome to another edition of the Scotland Rugby News podcast. I'm joined again by Gavin Harper, our editor, to discuss everything that's going on in the world of Scottish rugby over the last couple of weeks again. Just before we start, I'll again just remind you of our brilliant new subscriber offer that you can get. You can join the website, get so much good stuff right across the website, from Glasgow, Edinburgh, Scotland to the club teams. You get absolutely everything for just £1 for 6 months of coverage. So if you just go onto the website, scotlandrugbynews.com/subscribe, and you'll get absolutely everything you need right there. And it's the best value for money you could get. But yeah, we'll just look back over this last weekend. It was a bit of a mixed weekend right across the board. Gav, you obviously watched the Scotland women's game on Saturday afternoon, 15-12 defeat to Ireland. That kind of was a bit disappointing, and I think you kind of wrote it in your column or in your match report, that it was kind of some decision making maybe quite not there. It just kind of feels like a familiar tale for Scottish rugby.
Yeah, do you know, it was a frustrating one because it was a game that they had in their grasp, and unfortunately they just let it slip. I think Rachel Malcolm said after the game that basically you can't defend for as long as they did and not expect the dam to burst at some point. And unfortunately for Scotland, that was just before the end. Yeah, an odd one. They chose not to take a what some teams would consider a kickable penalty. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think that, kick it, they went to the corner, which was a sensible decision. But the frustration then was they camped themselves up in front of Ireland's posts, and I thought, okay, just drop a goal, take the draw, and a draw would have got them WXV1, which would have meant they were playing the likes of England and the best teams in the world later this year, but also they would have qualified automatically for the World Cup. So it was really strange to hear after the game that wasn't even something that had basically crossed their minds, taking that drop goal, and that they were so focused and going for a try. And I think that Brian Eason and the whole team can take great credit because they've come a long way in the last couple of years. But that's the next step. It's that on-field decision-making of, this hasn't been a good day, but let's get out of this with something. And actually finishing third in the Six Nations would have been just reward for the improvements they've shown. But, a fourth place finish does feel a wee bit, not that they've stunted their progress, but, they definitely don't have the rewards for some of the performances.
Yeah, it's kind of... That's what I was going to say. It's kind of like it's been a bit of a mixed tournament for Scotland. They also had the wins against Wales and Italy, a heavy defeat to England, improved performance against France, and then the Ireland game was kind of almost anticlimactic in the end, because I think people, especially after Ireland's defeat in England last week, which was even worse than what Scotland got against England, I think a lot of people maybe would have expected that Scotland to go over there and show how much they've improved and get a result that would have qualified for the World Cup. But at the same time, like you say, they've came so far in the last couple of years that maybe it's a wee bit too harsh to criticise them too much.
Yeah, I think this is it. It's a difficult kind of balance to strike because they have made a lot of progress. They've turned around a run where they were losing. I mean, they lost 12 games in a row 12 months ago. But those games, they could quite easily have lost the Wales game. They could quite easily have won the Ireland game. And I think that's the frustration, is that there's still, again, how many times have we said this about the men's team? There is too big a difference between the best and the worst performances.
Yeah.
And they don't hit a consistent level often enough that you can say, okay, that was an 8 out of 10 and they couldn't have done any more to win that game.
And also they were missing key players as well, weren't they? Because obviously Chloe Rowley's suspension, and then Rona Lloyd was away at the GB7s again, so that was kind of
Then there was a lengthy injury delay to Katie Mattinson in the sort of just after Scotland scored, and that didn't help. That, having played in games, albeit at a very low level, where you get long injury breaks, it's always hard to get going again. And you could see that after that break, the Irish players they started better and they kind of built momentum into the game. And while that it didn't reap immediate dividends for them, but they did kind of wear Scotland down. And it was, as you say, they were missing a couple of important players. Lana Skildon dropping out was obviously a blow on Thursday or Friday as well. So it was a tough afternoon for them, but I suppose they get a shot at the World Cup through WXV2 again, and they'll hope to now go and win that as they did last year, and make sure they can get a place at the World Cup that way.
So just as a final question on it, overall, would you class this as a successful Six Nations, a unsuccessful Six Nations, or a bit of both?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I think that's a really good question. But I think a bit of both. I think there's been progress, but I think it's disappointing that they haven't got the results that necessarily show the progress that the team has made. And I think they'll be disappointed that the Italy and Ireland performances weren't at a standard that they would have hoped to have delivered. And they, again, they played their best rugby in a losing effort against the French. And in some ways, a lot of it feels like we've been here before and we were saying this stuff just a few weeks ago. So, I mean, a mirror of the men's Six Nations, but less disappointing, I think, because of where Scotland maybe started in the kind of pecking order.
Yeah, maybe that's both the biggest compliment and biggest criticism that we can give them, is that it just feels like the men's team all over again. But it just feels like no matter what Scottish rugby team is playing, decision making, stuff like that, it just always seems to be the problem throughout. But we'll move on to Edinburgh now. Obviously, they were down in Cardiff on the weekend. It was a good result in the end. They obviously got the win that they were looking for, but maybe not the most exciting performances or the best results. I think it was one of those games that, again, kind of summed up Edinburgh's season, where they have a lot of the ball, they have a lot of territory, but they just can't seem to get over the line. And sort of, I think all season they've had something like 2 bonus point wins, which just doesn't seem right. When I think if they'd got a few more of these, you'd be quite comfortably in the playoffs. But now they're kind of still scrapping it out. Yeah,
it's interesting. I actually looked at the URC table this morning, and I think I'm right in saying that Edinburgh in 9th have the same number of wins as Stormers in 4th or 5th.
Yeah.
And nobody's questioned that the Stormers will make the playoffs, but there's plenty of people on our social media channels commenting saying, Edinburgh might be lucky to scrape in. And to be honest, they might be right, because that missing a bonus point on Saturday probably means they're going to have to get something from Munster or the Benetton games right at the end of the season, and those are 2 probably of your toughest games of the season. So I guess you watched the Edinburgh game for us. What do you think? What do you put that down to? Because the attack just hasn't fired really all season. Is it? It can't be a personnel problem, is it?
No, it can't, because it doesn't seem to matter who is playing. It's just the same thing over and over again. Sorry, they had a lot of opportunities to score. They had, obviously, after the Scarlets game last week, Sean Everett kind of spoke about it as well, that I think in the first half against Scarlets, they were in the 22 something like 7 times in the first half and only converted 1 of them. And it was kind of a similar story down in Cardiff. Cardiff defended brilliantly. Obviously, it was a pretty big day for them as well. It was their last proper home game of the season. It was kind of, Ellis Jenkins was retired after the game, and I obviously came off injured after 28 minutes with a head injury, concussion. So it was a big day for them as well. And I think Glasgow or Edinburgh did well to kind of silence it, because the crowd were right up for it, even though Cardiff have been pretty poor all season. The results have been poor, but they seem to be in games quite a lot. And I think it's just like I say, Sean spoke about it after last week's game about being more clinical. It's just the same thing again. I think there was a big difference in the second half when Bill Matta came on. He was one of the few players that was willing to take the ball and just run with it, and it showed. Edinburgh in the last 20 minutes were a much better side. Got the couple of tries that, two tries that they got. Almost got a third right at the end. It was Mark Bennett was just a fingertip away from being able to hold on to it. But it was a strange performance. It was like, I think kind of Sean spoke after it, and he was pretty happy with it as well. And I didn't really understand it because at half time it was 7-0, but I mean it could have been 20-1-0 for all the dominance that Edinburgh had. They were close to getting a try so many times. Then just that last wee bit just didn't seem to work.
They don't seem kind of able to put teams away. Edinburgh, the Scarlets game's an anomaly in that sense, but in other games they've really struggled to put teams away and win games comfortably. Is that fair?
Yeah, I definitely think that's fair. I think just look at them all season, it's been the same thing. I think say the Scarlets game was a bit of an outlier. The Bayonne game, the second half, they kind of did the same thing. They kind of spoke about it after it. Like Matt Curry spoke about it, saying, we need to keep doing this every week. They got the 4 tries that day. Obviously, there's no bonus point in that match, but it was kind of one of those things that is like, well, we need to take this into the league now and start doing it when it matters and getting the bonus points. And they just don't seem to be able to do it. It's a very strange situation because it's not like they don't have an array of attacking talent in that team.
Is it a worry? We can talk about Glasgow in a minute, but is it a worry, Mark, that Edinburgh and Glasgow are struggling, even in the end of April, beginning of May, to string together 80-minute performances? Because they basically haven't done that since the Six Nations.
Yeah, 100%. I think, especially with Glasgow, I think Edinburgh are where they're sitting. They're quite happy to just be getting the wins and be close to getting the place. But I think where Glasgow are, they need to be kind of blowing teams away at this stage to send a message to Leinster if they're going to worry them, because I think Leinster have quite clearly taken their eye off the ball in the last couple of weeks. With the Champions Cup and stuff. So I think Glasgow need to kind of show that they have what it takes to really go and threaten Leinster at the top, because when it comes down to it in the playoffs, Leinster will put out their best teams again, no doubt about it. I don't think, especially after I don't think they won anything last year, so they're going to want to win everything they can. And I think if you look at this Glasgow team, that just don't seem to be firing on all cylinders either. It is a bit worrying, I would say, that they're not able to put in for the 80 minutes. It's been a frustrating couple of weeks for both teams, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But like we said about the table, like I know Sean speaks about it all the time about how tight the log is, and it's Stormers are in 5th on 45 points, right down to Lions then on 11th or 39 points. There's only 6 points in it between 6 teams. It's going to be an interesting end to the season. Yeah,
it certainly is. If you're a Glasgow fan, you're desperate for them to finish top of the league, obviously, and see where they finish, and if they can get a home quarter final. I think that will be massive for Glasgow. That home advantage in knockout games is so important that if they can secure that and the prospect of them possibly playing Edinburgh, Glasgow fans would be absolutely licking their lips at that.
Yeah.
And Edinburgh, I mean, if you're an Edinburgh fan, you're desperate to get in that top 8, and it is so tight that a strange result, an Ospreys winning in South Africa, or something like that, could shake it up. And Edinburgh could find themselves pretty secure in the top 8, or they could be dragged into a kind of further battle. So it's 3 games to go, I think, and it's certainly getting pretty tight.
Yeah, those games for Edinburgh aren't easy either. Obviously, it's Edinburgh at home. You'd expect them to win it quite comfortably, but then it's Munster and Benetton. It's 2 difficult games. Munster at home, again, not going to be easy. You'd hope they'd get a result at home, but you just never know against a team like Munster. And then going to Benetton is proven to be quite difficult for teams this year.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think Edinburgh now realistically are in 2 cup finals to end their season. I think if there's an opportunity at all to rotate players or try something with the squad, it has to be this Zebra game at home. And you would like to think that Sean Everett knows that some of his frontline players aren't maybe firing. So basically, it's his best team for 3 games, and then possibly another 3 if they get through to
See where it goes
through the playoffs. I think just to touch on that, I think somebody that I'd had a fair bit of criticism earlier in the year was Jamie Ritchie. Obviously lost the Scotland captaincy and lost his place in the Scotland team for the end of the Six Nations, but he's bounced back, superbly. I think he's been in great form the last 4 or 5 weeks, and that back row. Obviously, Bill Mata didn't start at the weekend, but if you Edinburgh, plenty to talk about Edinburgh's back three with potentially Duhan, Buffelli, and Darcy when he's fit, but that back row of Ritchie, Watson, and Mata stands up to just about any back row in Europe.
Yeah, that's almost the frustrating thing, isn't it, with the fact that they're not challenging higher up, because you look at the team on paper and it is one of the best in the league.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think Edinburgh, I spoke to Chris Dean last week ahead of his 150th, and he kind of acknowledged that they have been underachievers, and that does bother the squad, because if you look at the names on paper, that pack against Cardiff was an all-international pack.
Yeah.
They've got all-international halfbacks. They've got a back three that if somebody picked that back three for Exeter, Toulouse, Leicester, you wouldn't bat an eyelid at it, and they just are not hitting the levels that they can individually. I
think on Saturday it was 13 out of 15 at the starting lineup were internationals, and then Matt Curry probably will be an international by the end of the summer, and Wes Goosen was the other one, so it's it's a pretty strong team.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I mean, Glasgow are in the same position, but I think more of their non-internationals hit higher levels than Edinburgh. Some of Edinburgh's internationals hit on a consistent level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. We'll go to Glasgow now, because obviously they were in Italy, played Zebra, ended up being a pretty comfortable win, but it didn't really look like it for large portions of the game. It was quite a sticky performance, I would probably describe it as.
Yeah, I think I would go along with that. I think it was. I always think that if you're playing a team towards the bottom or at the bottom of the league, you don't want to be dragged into a game that would suit them. You want to really impose yourself on them, and I didn't think Glasgow did that very well in the first half hour, and I felt like they made quite a lot of mistakes, and there was some accuracy errors that they'll be disappointed with, but without Zebra really, threatening Glasgow, it was a bit of a nothing half hour, and then it all kind of clicked into life. Great to see that not just Johnny Matthews can score off the back of these Glasgow Mauls. Gregor Hiddleston was getting a bit of a tough time in commentary from Ryan Wilson for breaking off one a wee bit early. So yeah, it was good to see him hanging on to the back of the Maul and flopping over for a couple of scores. And yeah, second half they pulled away, but with some of the names on the bench, I think Xander Fagerson made a big difference. I thought Lucio Sordoni had a particularly tough afternoon. I think I said that on Twitter, but and Scott Cummings made a difference when he came on as well. And again, that's maybe where Glasgow are better at using the squad, is that Cummings and Xander, they can afford to leave these guys on the bench and bring them on, and they made a big difference when they did come on.
Yeah, there was the added talking point from the game, which was quite interesting, was obviously Franco Smith versus Franco Smith Jr. It was a nice thing to see, wasn't it? Yeah,
it's great. Look, I don't know. There's many opportunities where you'll see something like that, and particularly in an environment where it's a guy playing for an Italian team against his dad in the coaching a Scottish side. It was quite a unique setup, but there was some nice pictures of the family on socials after the game. So yeah, no, it was good. It was good to see. But I think for everybody concerned with Scottish rugby, just good that Franco Smith Senior was the one with the smile on his face at the end.
Yeah, which maybe a rare thing at times, but with Glasgow then getting that win, Leinster were again beaten in South Africa. It kind of puts them top of the table just now, but also they've got those two games in South Africa, and if they show up like they did in the first half an hour of that Zebra game, it's going to be a difficult couple of weeks.
Yeah, this is it. And I think now Franco Smith has had his rotation.
Yeah.
And maybe like Sean Everett, it just has to be full noise for the next 3 weeks. Make sure they get through, and then some of these guys can take the summer off. Your Sione Tuipulotus and Xander Fagersons might have 6 games left before September.
Yeah.
So let's just. I think they have to get something from. They can't do what Edinburgh did and go to South Africa and come home with nothing. I think Glasgow would be in a bit of strife then. 2 wins would be obviously superb and probably enough to secure top spot. But I think 1 win and if they could pick up a losing bonus point, probably to the Bulls, then I think they'd be doing okay.
Yeah, because like we mentioned already, the playoffs are around the corner. We've got a story on the website today, which again, if you join for £1 for 6 months, you'll be able to read it on there, as well as everything else that we have about the venues that Glasgow are going to look at for those playoffs, especially if they reach getting the whole way to the final, which would be a good achievement. Obviously, last year they lost a home quarterfinal to Munster, which wasn't great, but if they got to a home quarterfinal this year, again, it would likely be at Scotstoun. I know there's been some kind of talk about Murrayfield taking it, especially if somehow it ends up as a Glasgow versus Edinburgh game. I think Sean Everett kind of joked about that at the weekend, that he would like to see it at Murrayfield, get the crowd there. Obviously that gives him some home advantage, but that can't happen obviously for that game, because Taylor Swift is playing it at Murrayfield on that occasion, and I think even a Glasgow Edinburgh game isn't going to move our fans out of the way. So so that'll be at home for certain. We kind of mentioned it as well, that semi-final they look to be at home, but then a final kind of would be at Murrayfield. But it's great. It'll be great to get a bigger crowd stuff in, but it does kind of feel like almost giving up home advantage a wee bit in that case, doesn't it?
Do you know, I would love to see if Glasgow got to have a URC final. I would love to see it played in Glasgow. I don't know if Hampden would be available that weekend, but somewhere like Hampden would be a better choice for me in terms of engaging that Glasgow Warriors supporter base than, do you know what? Glasgow are in the final. It's only an hour along the M8. Just put buses on and send everybody to Murrayfield. I realise there's a cost involved, but I just think it would send a message to the people of Glasgow and Glasgow fans that, do you know what, we actually value what you give us, and we'll make, whether it was Ibrox, Celtic Park, or Hampden, we make it a proper home game, if you like, for Glasgow. I think you'd lose that home advantage if it moves away from Scotstoun, but there's only so much you can do within the confines of what Scotstoun is, and you would like to think that more than 10,000 fans would want to go to the URC final should Glasgow get there. So it's all up for debate, I think, at the moment within the corridors of power at Murrayfield and Scotstoun. So let's hope they can come up with some solutions. But as you say, the quarterfinal would definitely be at Scotstoun. Can't imagine Taylor Swift.
Maybe they could swap.
Taylor Swift playing on Danes Drive might be that might be a bigger story than Glasgow Warriors playing at Murrayfield. But look, we'll wait and see. But let's just make sure that Glasgow and Edinburgh hopefully get there in the short term.
Yeah, because just lastly on that, it's kind of been spoken about a lot about Glasgow's home record. It's so good. They've not lost a league game there this season. The only defeat was the Champions Cup against Northampton, which can happen to anybody. And it's kind of been spoken about as well. Like Tom Jordan spoke about it last week. Nathan Beth spoke about it last week. That the support is such a big part of that because of how involved they get. I think then if you put, it's unlikely that they would sell out Murrayfield, I would imagine. But if you put 10, 20,000 into Murrayfield, it's a lot harder to get that atmosphere.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think this comes down to the whole, are you a Scotland or an Edinburgh, Glasgow fan? I would like to think that some of the people who go and watch Edinburgh would say, "Nah, do you know what? We'll go and support Glasgow in the final." Which I know to some people, particularly of a football persuasion, would be like Rangers fans going to a Celtic game and cheering them on. That's probably less likely. But it's you might end up with Murrayfield 30 or 40,000, which would be great. But again, I think Hampden's 52,000. So if you do end up with 40 in Murrayfield, which holds 67, it could feel like it's not full. Your big gaps in the stands, but somewhere like Hampden would feel much fuller. So it's but Glasgow's home record's second to none, and they will hope to. I think they would be silly to take a semi-final away from Scotland. I think probably when you reach the final, other factors, namely money, dictate that you do that. But I think quarterfinals, semi-finals, let's stick some extra seats at Scotstoun and get that place absolutely packed than take them elsewhere.
Definitely. Speaking of Glasgow, there's also been a couple of big stories with them the last couple of weeks, particularly around George Turner's future. It's been linked with a move to Japan, which I don't think anybody could blame him for heading over and enjoying the last few years of his career. But it was an interesting sort of answer from Franco Smith on Friday when he was kind of asked about it. He kind of smiled and gave a nod and look, but didn't really give anything away. Just sort of said he'd be available from the quarterfinals onwards, and then sort of dismissed any chat of next season. And it's kind of interesting one because it does feel like he's going to leave and they just don't want to see it.
Yeah, I think you read into what you will that they signed Grant Stewart again. I know Fraser Brown's retired, and that was probably an inevitable outcome for a guy who's 34, had his fair share of injuries. But we should probably touch on his career. He's 60 plus caps for Scotland. He's been a great servant for club and country, and from somebody who didn't necessarily make it the way that people do now, through academies and stuff like that. I think he deserves a big send-off before the end of the season at Scotstoun. But George Turner, I think it feels inevitable that Glasgow probably will lose him to a big money deal in Japan. I think if that does happen, as you say, it's hard to grumble because rugby is a short career, and I think fair play to him. But it would leave Glasgow with a bit of a conundrum, if you like, as to what they would do at hooker, because obviously Grant Stewart comes in a funny place because he's not the oldest. He's 29. Johnny Matthews would become the elder statesman of their hookers, and then they've got two young guys, Angus Fraser and Gregor Hiddleston, who've had a bit of game time this season. But I thought Gregor Hiddleston played well on Saturday. But it's not masses of experience at absolutely top level. So you wonder if there are plans afoot there to maybe bring somebody in. And would it surprise me if it was somebody who wasn't Scottish? You could end up with a situation where more than one of them are away with the national team. So, look, it'll be interesting to see. But it does feel Franco Smith was clearly doing his best to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. But it does feel a wee bit inevitable that, in the sense that it was inevitable that Glasgow at some point in the season would have to announce they'd signed Adam Hastings and Rory Sutherland. They might be putting an announcement out soon saying that George Turner is off to pastures new. But as I say, who could blame him?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Adam Hastings, obviously the other position that's kind of caused a lot of talking point is Adam Hastings' return, and then what it means for the likes of Ross Thompson, because obviously you've got Hastings, you've got Tom Jordan there, you've got Donkey Weir, and then you've got Ross Thompson, and then it's four players fighting for the one position. Ross Thompson, obviously still young, relatively young. He'll want a bit more game time to try and force himself into the Scotland record. And obviously, I know Finn's there for the next few years, but he's not getting any younger. He's there needs to be some sort of development plan there as well.
Yeah.
And there's kind of been talk around Ross Thompson's future, but again, Franco was kind of not giving anything away again. But do you see him moving on at the end of the season?
Yeah, do you know what? It's really interesting because a few weeks ago, I remember you speaking to Duncan Weir at Scotstoun, and I think he basically let the cat out of the bag that he was almost ready to sign a new contract, but that's all gone quiet.
Yeah.
And it's really, normally you get a judge of these things at this time of the season, who's not in the team and who's not listed as injured, and Duncan Weir played that Harlequins game, and I think he's played since. Then Ross Thompson comes back in, and you say, well, I thought this guy was out of the picture. So it's really hard to judge from Franco's team selections what's going on. But, the maths doesn't work. 4 into 1 just isn't possible. When I spoke to Sione Tuipulotu a couple of weeks ago, he basically said, Tom Jordan's done a great job, but the guy's a 12 who plays 10. So clearly there are plans afoot to have him at 12 more. That still leaves you 3. So if Tom Jordan was exclusively a 12, a centre, then it works that you've still got 3 guys.
Yeah.
And that's a way that Ross Thompson stays. If he moves to Edinburgh, which has been speculated on, does he get any more game time? That's my problem. Ben Healy's so important or has been so important to Edinburgh this season.
Yeah.
That, he's played every minute, I think, of the URC, and he's only missed 1 game. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. But I think getting Ross Thompson more minutes on the pitch, wherever that might be, is important because he seems to be the one that could be the kind of long-term international 10, but he needs to play more.
Yeah. I think you're spot on there as well. It is an interesting one, like you say, like Tom Jordan is probably more of a 12, and he's going to have his own Scotland ambitions as well when it comes later in the year. I know he's not qualified in time for the summer tour, which is probably a bit frustrating for him that he came over a month or 2 later. But you'd maybe expect him to be involved in some way during the Alt Test just to sort of see how he gets involved towards the end of the year when he does become qualified.
Yeah, look, I think if you go back nearly 10 years now, I can remember Josh Strauss being involved. I think he was invited to train with the squad before he was actually eligible to play for Scotland. I know he was involved in the World Cup training camp. So I think, you probably see Tom Jordan involved in some capacity during the autumn, and then he might get a cap at some point in the next 12 months. But I think he's somebody that's shown such good form at 10 and at 12, and those are not positions that we are blessed with huge depth. So I expect him to be involved in some capacity later in the year.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we'll leave it there for today anyway, I think. Just a reminder again that you can join the website and get 6 months of brilliant coverage for just £1. Like I said earlier, it's the best value you get. You'll barely notice that £1 leaving your bank account, but you'll definitely notice plenty of good content on the website. We've got columns from Rob Robertson, we've got club features, we've got everything from Glasgow and Edinburgh that you need. So if you enjoy Scottish Rugby, then you want to be a subscriber to our website. Thanks for joining us, Gav.
Thanks very much.